Hello everyone and welcome to Hombreon, a channel where I would like to talk about man-on-man relationships. No, wait, let me say that a different way. A channel where I'd like to talk about guys doing stuff with other guys. No, wait, that's no better. This channel is an opportunity to talk about the complex and often overlooked relationships between... No, that's too wordy. Let's just talk about guys that befriend other guys. I am a huge Simpsons fan, and I often tell people that growing up, The Simpsons was like a second mother to me. I watched tons of it, and it's actually become one of my comfort shows to watch when the world is collapsing all around me. Recently, I rewatched one of my favorite old Simpsons episodes. Oh, sorry, not old. Classic? Is that better? Yeah, one of my favorite classic Simpsons episodes. Simpson and Delilah. Now, I never knew this is what this episode was called, and it's apparently referencing that story about Samson. You know, the guy that Nelson wasn't that one episode. Stupid Bart. But yeah, Simpson and Delilah is one of my favorite classic Simpsons episodes, mainly because it features one of the Simpsons' most interesting characters, Karl. No, not that one. This one, the white one. Before I begin, does anyone know if Karl Carlson had been given a name before this episode? If he had been named, I find it extra hilarious that they chose the name Karl with a K for Karl with a K's episode. This was pretty early on in Simpsons history. They could have really picked any name for the guy. I wonder why they went with Karl, especially if Karl Carlson had already been named Karl Carlson. Anyway, yeah, let's talk about Karl. Karl with a K, no last name given apparently, and just for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna just refer to him as Karl because calling him White Karl just seems kinda silly. As far as I know, he's only in this one episode, but boy did he make an impression in just this one episode. And Marge was concerned about female secretaries making kissy faces at Homer. Little did she know! Side note, Marge immediately approved of Karl as soon as she heard his voice was not that of a woman's. Too funny. But yeah, Karl. He didn't really make any appearances in other episodes, at least not speaking roles anyway, but I wanted to make a video discussing the character of Karl and his relationship, air quotes, with Homer, because I haven't really seen anyone talk about Karl before, and I really wanted to talk about him. Karl's relationship with Homer can be described in many ways. For one thing, he acts as sort of a mentor to Homer, while also being very paternal at times, and he even comes across as Homer's friend in certain parts. For one thing, he's very supportive of Homer, and genuinely seems to want Homer to succeed. Supporting Homer is more where we see the mentor/motivational coach in Karl. Karl has a moment of honesty with Homer where he points out some of Homer's flaws and that he clearly doesn't belong in his new junior executive role. After all, Homer only got this promotion by luck. When Homer asks Karl how he knew he didn't belong, Karl drops some truth bombs on Homer, like how he's dressed, how he sits. These comments from Karl are pretty negative, but I don't get the sense they were meant to be harmful to Homer. It's more like constructive criticism. He's really hammering in a very important truth to Homer. That if Homer wants to succeed in his new junior executive role, Homer needs to believe that he can succeed. And Karl hammers in this point by delivering one of the best motivational speeches I have ever heard.
I want you to say to yourself, I deserve this. I love it. I am nature's greatest miracle. Go ahead, say it.
I
Trust me, Homer. Take a step and say it.
I deserve this.
Louder.
I deserve this.
Shout it.
I am nature's greatest miracle!
Like, wow, I want that on a t-shirt. I want that to be my alarm every morning. I would love to wake up and shout, I am nature's greatest miracle every damn day of my life. I would pay someone to say that to me every day. We'll talk about it a little later as well, but this is basically Karl telling Homer, you gotta believe to achieve.
I gotta believe!
Which, I'll admit, it seems to be the episode's message, but that becomes a little blurry later on if you ask me, but like I said, we'll talk about that later. Back to my Karl talk. Karl definitely has Homer's best interests in mind, and he goes out of his way to be there for Homer in a variety of ways. When Homer forgets his and Marge's anniversary, Karl planned ahead and had a singing telegram for Marge ready to go right when Homer needed it most. Good guy, Karl. Side note, how the heck did he know it was their anniversary? I don't think much time has passed since Homer hired Karl to be his secretary. Dude works fast and clearly did his research. Karl also guides Homer on how to dress for work and lets him know that the suit he picks should make him feel like a prince. He also tells Homer that he should stand naturally and let his gut hang out. It's funny that Homer reaches for the bargain section of suits. 2 suits for $99? Come on, Homer, you're a big shot junior executive now. Aim bigger! By far, one of the most blatant examples of Karl having Homer's best interests in mind is when Karl takes a metaphorical bullet for Homer. For those unfamiliar, let me quickly recap the premise of the episode. Earlier in the episode, Homer sees an advertisement for demoxenil, a hair regrowth drug advertised as a miracle breakthrough in hair regrowth. Homer goes to see a dermatologist at the mall, hey, remember those? But finds the treatment package to be too expensive. He then gets the idea from Lenny and Karl, yes, that one, that he should charge demoxenil to the company insurance, which he does, but has some concerns that Burns may find out. Flash forward to later in the episode, Homer impresses Mr. Burns with his suggestion of tartar sauce in the cafeteria to improve worker motivation. By the way, I absolutely love that Burns calls it tartar sauce, and I say that like anytime I get the chance. Anytime tartar sauce comes up, I say tartar sauce. It's good stuff. Anyway, Burns begins to treat Homer better than Smithers, and this causes Smithers to look into Homer's sudden hair regrowth. That's when Smithers uncovers the shady dealings Homer did with the dermatologist. That makes it sound like they did something clandestine in an alley somewhere, but oh, that's exactly what they did, in a way. Smithers then reveals to Mr. Burns that one of his executives, he doesn't mention that it's Homer, at least not yet, has committed insurance fraud by billing the company insurance a grand total of $1,000, which is probably just about enough for an ivory back scratcher. Burns then demands that Smithers fire the person in question, and Smithers smugly proceeds into Homer's office and fires him, telling Homer that Burns won't look too kindly on someone who has just committed insurance fraud. I'm not sure what Smithers' problem here is. Clearly, Homer just needed demoxenil to keep his brain from freezing. Karl then steps up for Homer in one of the most bro things someone can do for someone else. He takes the blame for Homer, surprising both Homer and Smithers. Mr. Smithers then has no choice but to fire Karl instead of Homer. Karl has sort of a badass moment here where he cuts Mr. Smithers a damn check for $1,000, putting his petty ass in place and simultaneously pissing him off. Smithers ain't fooled though, and he knows Karl is just covering for Homer and that Homer clearly is the one responsible for this. Smithers does ask Karl why it matters to him whether or not Homer has hair, and Karl cryptically answers that his reasons are his own. I want to talk a lot about why Karl did this for Homer, and Homer will ask for us very soon, but this is something that genuinely does perplex me. Why did Karl do this? First, I want to ask, did Karl do this on a whim? Maybe, but probably not. I want to say that Karl probably didn't have a ton to lose here. At least that's what I think. Sure, he interviewed for the job, so he needed employment, but I get the feeling he probably could get a job anywhere, so getting fired possibly didn't seem like that big of a deal for him. He also might have had a little money in the bank. I might be reaching here, but just making a few assumptions based on the few things we know about Karl, or at least things we can assume about him. For one thing, he just casually handed Smithers a $1,000 check and didn't really dwell on it at all. Karl seemingly lives in a pretty fancy place. Earlier in the episode, we see Karl at home on the morning of Homer and Marge's anniversary, where he calls Homer to check in on the singing telegram. So maybe it was on a whim that Karl saved Homer's ass here, but I have to believe that it goes a little deeper than that. Secondly, we do have to ask, was Karl in love with Homer? No, he definitely wasn't in love with Homer. Is Karl gay? 100%. You can't even pretend the signs aren't there. And it's definitely one of those, oh yeah, he's definitely gay, we just can't say it out loud moments. Karl is 100% gay. He is 1,000% gay. I will say, when I was a kid first watching this episode, that's definitely what I suspected, that one of the biggest reasons why Karl did this for Homer was that he was in love with him. But I definitely don't think that anymore, especially not after making this video. Okay, so to recap, was Karl in love with Homer? Nope, definitely not. He clearly does care about Homer though, and like I've been saying, he has Homer's best interest in mind. And while we're on the subject of Karl's motivation to help Homer, we of course have to talk about arguably the most famous scene from the episode. The scene where Karl doesn't kiss a fool. But we'll get there. My point though is that while he may not be in love with Homer, he does care about him. He's definitely trying to be there for him in the way a friend or a brother or even a father would be there for someone. It's also worth noting Karl doesn't have anything to gain from helping Homer either. He's taking the blame for him without asking for anything else in return. So, why did Karl do this? Homer asks for us, and Karl gives us an answer. Sort of. Karl treats this like it's no big deal. He implies to Homer that what he's done isn't anything extraordinary. He compares himself to a soldier taking a grenade for their commander, And most interestingly, he says he did what he was born to do. What that is exactly, I'm not sure, to be honest. Was he born to take the blame for other people? Or is he saying he was born to serve? Like, maybe he was born to be the world's best secretary? Actually, yeah, that one sounds pretty accurate. Maybe that's what Karl was referring to. Karl does, in many ways, seem to be one of the best damn secretaries there ever was, from knowing exactly when Homer and Marge's anniversary was, and correctly assuming Homer would forget their anniversary, to writing Homer's speech for him at the end of the episode. So maybe this is what Karl was referring to when he said that he simply did what he was born to do. Speaking of writing Homer's speech for him, now we can talk about my favorite scene in the episode. Probably everyone's favorite scene from the episode. The scene where Karl doesn't kiss a fool. Yes, I already used that line, but I'm gonna use it again because why the hell not? For those of you unfamiliar with the episode, let me briefly explain what happened after Karl got fired. Homer arrives home and Bart accidentally spills what remains of Homer's demoxenil, and Homer loses all of his hair the morning he has to deliver his big speech. By the way, I really hate Smithers in this episode. He is such a little weasel in this episode, and it's definitely not a good look for Smithers. Not a good look at all, Mr. Smithers. Anyway, Smithers taunts Homer and lets him know that it's almost time for him to deliver his speech, and Homer is terrified, when suddenly he sees a note that was left to him by his best friend Karl. No, not that one. It's a speech. More specifically, a well-thought-out and phonetically spelled-out speech specifically for Homer from the world's best damn secretary. Homer, though, still has doubts that he can actually deliver this speech now that he doesn't have any hair. Karl then assures Homer that he can do it because all of his successes up until this point have been because of him and not his hair, which is a super nice thing of him to say. And it's something that I think he really did try and show Homer from the very beginning. Remember, you gotta believe.
I gotta believe!
But Homer's not convinced, calling himself a fool, which Karl assures him that he is not by telling him that his mother told him never to kiss a fool, and then he smooches Homer. And again, Marge was worried about female secretaries making kissy eyes at Homer. Yeah. Okay, we do have to talk about this moment. What a moment! And what a great way to make a point to Homer. It's pretty legendary, and I have to say it again, no, I do not think Karl was in love with Homer. I think he was trying to make a point in the most dramatic way he knew how. And it worked! Look at Homer, look at that tiger, listen to that tiger growl. It is absolutely worth noting that this kiss between the two of them isn't treated like a big joke. There's no line from Homer where he goes, I'm straight, or, I don't go that way. That's not at all what Homer sounds like, but my point is that this isn't one of those gay panic moments. Homer is surprised by this, but Karl only did it to prove to Homer that he's not a fool. Impressive for the 90s that this kiss wasn't mocked by the episode. I think I've read somewhere that this was also one of the first man-on-man kisses in animation, which is just great. Now, I mentioned earlier that
I gotta believe!
Seems to be the message of the entire episode. And while I do agree with Karl that Homer had it in him the entire time, this episode sort of shows us that Homer pulled a Buggy the Clown and just failed upwards. The reason Homer's tartar sauce initiative succeeded in lowering employee accident rates wasn't because of the tartar sauce, it was because Homer was no longer in a position to put other employees in danger. And the end of the episode only shows us that maybe Homer actually can't succeed without his hair, or maybe he had a better chance of succeeding if he did have hair. Homer tries to deliver his speech, but he gets written off. After all, he did have the nerve trying to tell people how to run the plant when he doesn't even have any hair. Like I said earlier, I think this kind of blurs the message, at least what I think the message of this episode is, that Homer's gotta believe in himself in order to succeed. And while that is certainly true, and I'd like to think Karl was correct in teaching Homer this, the episode ultimately shows us that Homer having hair definitely helped him succeed. Anyway, this isn't a video about what the moral of the story was. This is a video about Karl and Homer. Earlier, I mentioned that Karl is there for Homer in a way that a friend would be to another friend. And I do have to point out that while I do consider these two to be friends, it's more accurate to probably say that Karl was Homer's friend, but Homer wasn't exactly Karl's friend. After all, I don't think Homer knew all that much about Karl. I don't think he even knew his last name. And while their relationship is definitely friendly, it does lean more into a mentor-mentee or motivational coach relationship. And I do have to be honest, their relationship does seem a little more on the employee-employer side. Karl is, after all, the best damn secretary in the world. So, were Homer and Karl friends? I'd like to think so. Was Karl the best damn secretary in the world? I think it's pretty obvious that he was. One thing is also for certain. Karl was just an all-around awesome guy. A sweet little angel. This has been Hombreon, and I will see you all in another video.